Okay, this is chapter 1 of A Night Divided. How these read-alouds are going to work is, of course, I'll read the story to you, and I'd like you to follow along with your eyes on the book. And sometimes there'll be some highlighted parts that I think are significant, and sometimes I'll stop and just kind of discuss those a little bit so that we can all understand. Also down here, I have some thinking prompts. Those are there to help you think about what we're reading and keep up with what's going on in the story. So I will keep those there, and I was thinking maybe when I do each chapter, I'll have a little recap down there as well, so we can remember what happened in the previous chapter. If you have any suggestions for how I could do these read-alouds better, please let me know. But for now, we're going to start. Chapter 1 of A Night Divided. There was no warning the night the wall went up. I awoke to sirens screaming throughout my city of East Berlin. Instantly, I flew from my bed. Something must be terribly wrong. Why were there so many? I stopped when I read that because I thought to myself, Greta has an interesting reaction to there being sirens in her city. What do you think about that? Although it was a warm morning, that wasn't my reason for my sweaty palms or flushed face. My first thought was that it must be an air raid. My parents had described them to me from the Second World War. I pulled my curtains apart, expecting the worst. But when I looked out, my heart slammed into my throat. Not even the darkest part of my imagination could have prepared me for this. It was Sunday, August 13th, 1961, a day I would remember for the rest of my life, when a prison had been built around us as we slept. Lines of Grenzers, our nickname for the border police, the Grenztruppen, stood guard along a fence of thorny wire, in some places higher than their heads, and for as far as my eyes could see. They stood like iron statues with stern expressions and long rifles in their hands. It was obvious that anyone who tried to cross would get far worse than a rip in their clothes, because the Grenzers didn't face the Westerners on the other side of the fence. They watched us. It was very clear who they planned to shoot if there was any trouble. If only I'd looked out earlier. During the night, I'd heard strange noises of hammering, heavy footsteps, and hushed conversations from men with sharp voices. But I rolled over and told myself it was only a dream, or a nightmare perhaps. If I had looked, I could have warned my family in time, just as our neighbor Herr Kraus tried to warn us. He knew this was coming. Hadn't he said for years that our government was not to be trusted? That we might salute the flag of East Germany, but that it was really Russia we bowed to? And my father had known. So I highlighted this too, and I wanted to stop and just talk about what that means. So East Germany, like I was saying in the intro, Germany was divided into two different countries, East Germany and West Germany. And right now, Greta and her family are in East Germany, in a city that was called East Berlin at the time. And she's saying here that even though they have their own flag and they have their own country, really they're under the power of Russia. So that's what that means there, and I made a little note to remind us of what that means. Okay, so I'll continue now. My father. As if she had heard my thoughts, from out in the kitchen I heard Mama cry, "Aldous!" That was his name. And with a final glance out the window, I remembered the reason for Mama's screams. My father wasn't here. Nor was my brother Dominic. They had been in the West for 2 nights and were supposed to have come home later today. With an endless row of guns and soldiers between us, the fence just changed that. I raced from my room and arrived in the kitchen to see my oldest brother Fritz holding my mother in his arms as she sobbed on his shoulder. He eyed me and then cocked his head towards the window in case I hadn't already seen the fence. I only brushed tears from my eyes and wrapped my arms around her back. Maybe she didn't need me, but in that moment I desperately needed her. She felt me there and put a shaking hand on my arm. "They've done it, Goethe," she said through her tears. "Worse than anyone ever thought." Mama had been a beautiful woman once, but that was years ago. She had come through too much war and famine and poverty to care about the curl in her hair or the neatness of her dress. Her blonde hair was already turning gray and her eyes bore early wrinkles in the creases. Sometimes I looked in the mirror and hoped life would not be equally hard on me. "Why now?" I asked. "Why today?" I looked up to Fritz for an answer. He was nearly 6 years older than me and the smartest person I knew, next to my father. If my mother had no answers, then surely he did. But all he could do was shrug and hold her tighter as her sobs grew louder. Besides, I already understood more than I wanted to. The fence was only the beginning. It had divided my life in half, and nothing would ever be the same again. So that's chapter 1. And I love the way that the author ended this chapter by saying that the fence had divided her life in half. What do you think Goethe meant by that? Also, I want you to do a little brain scan. It's really important at the end of a chapter that you scan your brain and you think about what you know so far about the story. That's going to help you hold on to that information as we keep reading. So for this brain scan, I want you to think about which characters we've been introduced to in the first chapter. See if you can write a list of all of the characters we know so far. Let me see, there are 5 characters that have been mentioned in the family and one other character that's not in the family. See if you can name them all.